I continue to read the biography of Isaiah Berlin, Alive, by Michael Ignatieff. This is chapter 13, Cold War, and this is the second part. Having delivered this worthy but hardly incendiary sermon, Berlin was appalled to read in the New York Times the next day that he had been urging American universities to take up Marxist studies. The story was buried on the inside pages, and later editions dropped it altogether. But Isaiah wrote a nervous letter to the editor insisting that he had been misunderstood. Marxism should certainly be taught in American universities, but only by teachers sufficiently critical to take account of the errors and distortions in which Marxism abounds. Then he wrote to the provost of Harvard, assuring him that he was not a communist fellow traveler, and asked George Kennan at the State Department to write a reassuring note to the FBI liaison officer at the state. Kennan duly informed the FBI that his friend was probably the greatest and wisest student of Soviet affairs in the whole Anglo-Saxon world. After a week, Isaiah wrote shamefacedly to Alice James, quote, "I'm indeed anti-communist, but perhaps when heretics are being burned right and left, it is not the bravest thing in the world to declare one's loyalty to the burners, particularly when one disapproves of the Inquisition." End quote. The Inquisition was indeed on the way. A U.S. Congressional committee was investigating supposed communists in academia and the defense industries. Senator McCarthy was just about to begin his sinister career. Edgar Hess had been dismissed from the State Department as a security risk and was being dragged through the courts. All of Isaiah's closest friends, the Frankfurters, the Alsops, the Schlesingers, were appalled at the poisonous atmosphere of intimidation and denunciation. It seems obvious that Isaiah was panicked by this atmosphere. He had been prudent, but he had hardly been brave. Although he sided with American liberals, he knew their battles were not really his. While the Frankfurters contributed to his defense, Isaiah maintained a degree of detachment towards the case which taxed their patience. On a weekend in Washington, he reportedly said to Mrs. Alice Roosevelt Longworth that he thought his was a little guilty and a little innocent. And Mrs. Longworth promptly repeated this remark in Marion Frankfurter's hearing. When Mrs. Frankfurter took him to task, Isaiah, now back in Oxford, replied that the battles of the Cold War seemed far away. He was happy to be safe within the monstery walls, subliminally unaware of the outside world. He did not refuse all gestures of solidarity. When Robert Oppenheimer, director of the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, was denied a security clearance because of his alleged communist sympathies, Isaiah joined others in writing letters of protest. But he remained aloof. In June 1951, Guy Burgers bolted to the Soviet Union. While other friends professed shock and moral dismay, Isaiah remained unperturbed, though he was more irritated than pleased when in 1953, Burgers sent a cheeky note from Moscow via Royal Herald, conveying his regards. Berlin gave every assistance to Peter Wright, the spy catcher from British intelligence, who called in search of any other accomplices. Burgers might have had inside academy or the establishment. Burgers' defection did sow panic among his English friends, especially Conway Rees, who had been a particularly close friend in the late 1930s. After Burgers' defection, Rees lived in terror that he would be denounced as a spy, which he was not. In 1956, in a confused attempt both to clear himself and mount a preemptive strike at what he feared might be a campaign of denunciation and defamation by Burgers himself, Rees collaborated with a popular tabloid, The People, in writing a wild denunciation of the Foreign Office as a nest of fellow travelers and spies. In this piece, he suggested that Berlin might have been working unwittingly for Burgers. Berlin wrote him an essay note making it clear that he never became a member of any organization Guy was working for. Nor have I ever been sent on any secret mission anywhere by anyone, nor was I Guy's assistant. End quote. Even here, angry as he was with Rees, he eventually re-established their friendship. And as for Burgers' trajectory, well, Berlin certainly did not look Burgers up when he visited Moscow in 1956. He never disavowed his friendship. This aloofness from the intense intellectual and emotional conflicts of the Cold War struck Albert Einstein when he met Berlin at Princeton in March 1952. Frankfurter had provided a fulsome letter of introduction, and the two talked amiably enough in Einstein's study about Soviet foreign policy. Afterwards, Einstein wrote to Frankfurter that Isaiah seemed to him like a highly intelligent spectator in God's big but mostly not very attractive theater. Isaiah's reaction to Einstein was equivocal. He was a genius, but in political things he seemed innocent. Einstein seemed to suppose that no decent man could have enemies on the left. Psychologically, he was inaccessible, with, as Isaiah reported to Vera Weizmann, the inhumanity of a child. Berlin wondered whether a genius for pure abstraction could only be cultivated at the expense of any close personal relationship. But there were two aspects of Einstein's thoughts which made an indelible impression, or at least accorded deeply with Berlin's central commitments. One was his sense of reality. There was only one world. Berlin wrote of Einstein that this was the world of a human experience. It alone was real. The sense of neutrality, that the world was as it seems, and that it could be known by patient and careful research, was the only sure guarantee against ideological intoxication. The second aspect of Einstein's thought, which appeared deeply, was that he managed to reconcile consistent internationalism and a battered of nationalism with a steady commitment to Zionism. By his very being, Einstein seemed to demonstrate that you could be both a Zionist and a cosmopolitan. And as Berlin sought to reconcile these opposing tendencies within himself, Einstein's example was a reassurance and an inspiration. In the autumn of 1949, Berlin gave a talk on BBC Radio on the Anglo-American predicament, which showed how deeply he had been affected by his sojourn in the United States and how thoroughly Anglo-American his essential loyalties had become. He insisted that Berlin must recognize that its ultimate interests lay neither with the empire nor with Europe, but with the United States. The article has a ring of presence in its acceptance of a British decline and American hegemony, but it angered both right and left. Lord Beaverbrook was who must have been offended that Berlin had turned down his offer to work for him, now took his revenge in the film in the form of an unsigned piece in the Evening Standard, which tore into him for his defeatism about the empire and his observance towards the Americans. Isaiah's views were hardly more popular on the left. Both Arnold Lasky and Isaiah's Oxford colleague, G.D.H. Cole, disliked the unwelcome thought that a commitment to the American capitalist camp precluded too much social and collectivism at home.